Okay, so we are reading the speech from Mother. Mother was talking at the Women's Fed anniversary in Korea. The setting of this was great, honestly, after many sessions, which was mostly made up of men while we were in Korea. And it was so nice to see so many women with colorful clothing on in the stadium, even waiting in line. Like the whole energy was different because you've got all these like cute Korean moms and Japanese moms who are like giggling and so excited to be a part of this. And yeah, it was really refreshing to join hear her speak. You could also tell that she felt very comfortable. And I do wonder if that's part of the reason why this speech was a little bit longer, because Mother was speaking to her daughters, her sisters. So yeah, I just wanted to give that context as we go through the speech. And, you know, in the speech, I think we're all going to notice how empowering it is. Mother's really talking specifically to the role of women and what we have to offer to the world. Kind of feels like this is something she's been waiting to share with people. So let's enjoy. So it starts with, dear leaders and Women's Federation members, both at home and abroad. How long has it been? Is it 3 years? I'm so happy to see you. Since the fall, human history has been dominated by men and marked by conflict and war. Especially in medieval Christian Europe, the status of women was not visible. Yet when nations faced a crisis, it was the women who stood at the forefront. Especially following the death of Jesus, the people of Israel, as a people without a nation, wandered around for 2,000 years. However, Israeli women and mothers continue the traditions of Judaism in their homes, enabling Israel to become what it is today. Now, I remember when this came across in the translation, it was very interesting for Mother to specifically be talking about the moms and the women of Israel. And it's very true if you know Jewish culture and Israel culture. It's, you know, it's the women's matriarchal line that holds the Jewish lineage. And, you know, I think most of us have a personal relationship with people like Tal, who really represent this like strong Israeli mothers, strong Jewish mothers, right? There's something different about them. There's no shame or blame in their confidence and in their strength. And it was very interesting for Mother to bring this up, especially in comparison to what she's talking about here when she looks at human history, which has been dominated by conflict and war. And it's true, you know, if you do the study, you can see that all these decisions about war came from this very patriarchal society, which men were in leadership. And of course, it's a question for all of us. If women were more at the table, how would those conversations shift? How would those decision-making shift because of the mother heart of God coming through? But Mother's talking about how women, you know, in the background in some ways, being unrecognized in some ways, but really being the ones who shaped the forward moving motion of history, that they were the surprising people who actually, you know, saved people, changed the culture, and fought for things in ways that maybe, you know, our male leadership have not always recognized. At this time, when we are working to firmly establish Chanoguk on True Parents' victorious foundation, the role of women is quite important. Women must take the lead and teach others about Heavenly Parent. And I want to just like pause here, because often in this speech and in other situations, I'm hearing this theme of women having an important role in educating people. And sometimes there's a part of me that reacts to that, like, is that all we can do? We can do so much more. But actually what I'm starting to shift in is, you know, through Father's leadership and through all of history, which has been very male dominated in leadership, a certain foundation has been laid, a certain external foundation has been laid, where the pieces have kind of been put together and the people are starting to come together. But that's only part of the equation of the providence. The other part of it is how we bring the consciousness of who we are as God's children and who Heavenly Parent is. How do we bring that up as quickly as possible? And it's true. I think it's women who can do that in such a powerful and significant way. You know, I've watched mothers speak in front of these high level VIPs, and I see there's like a different reaction. There's a different spark. There's a different, like a compelling heart that comes when it's this sincere motherly figure who's speaking so strongly. And I think that's Mother is an example of that, how we have a significant role to uplift the consciousness and educate people about the time we're in and who Heavenly Parent is. The only way for fallen humanity to return to the embrace of the Heavenly Parent, our Creator, is through true parents. Therefore, you who have received the blessing need to teach all of fallen humankind, from your families to your tribe, nations, and the whole world, so that all fallen people can rise to the position where they can gain the qualifications to attend our Heavenly Parent. Do you understand what I mean? And I always pay attention when Mother says, do you understand what I mean? Because I feel like Mother is really trying to drive a point home here. She's like, did you get that? That was a very important point here. And, you know, one of the questions that I think comes up for our generation is who true parents are, and, you know, how important is their role in our relationship with them? Can we be good people by just knowing who God is and loving our families and taking care of people? But there's a sentence here where Mother says, the only way for humanity to return to Heavenly Parent is through true parents. And sometimes that can be a hard pill to swallow, but it's really emphasizing the importance of true parents being an essential point in the providence. And I think, I honestly think, especially for second generation, I think that is one of the key ingredients that we missed growing up, because we were raised by first generation who didn't know what it was like to come up in our community. And I think those who have been able to break through in understanding who true parents are the ones who were able to navigate all the challenges. But if you haven't broken through in that place, then everything that comes our way that makes our faith difficult and our community challenges difficult, we don't have a way to navigate it because we're not rooted in this most important point of true parents' identity. And so no matter where we're at in that relationship and in that process, I just think it's important to recognize that our relationship with true parents is really fundamental in understanding who Heavenly Parent is. And it's good to identify it where we're at in that relationship and always be checking and evaluating where I need to grow in that area. So and then she's talking to WFWP, which does a lot of incredible, not just volunteer work, but, raises money and supports projects and uplifts humanitarian aid and things like that. And she's speaking to this. Doing volunteer work is good. It is what we have been doing until now. There are more than 200 nations on this earth with many problems. Nevertheless, we also need to let them know the essence with which they were born and help them realize that the only way for them to be blessed is to become our Heavenly Parents' children through true parents. And Grace, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, but there's almost a feeling that, like, this is the areas that maybe Women's Fed has been focusing on along with many other things, but it's now Mother is asking Women's Fed to go deeper and to be responsible to helping them understand who they are as God's children and to come into the full reign of true parents. And she's asking Women's Fed to do this, right? She's not asking UPF to do this. She's specifically asking Women's Fed because of the women's role and ability to move hearts and to educate people. In particular, as this Korean peninsula, this nation that is meant to become our Heavenly Parents' homeland, walks the path to becoming a heavenly unified Korea, true parents' efforts, as well as your own, are required. However, its people need to know the truth of the providence, the essence of the Creator, and the purpose for which they were born. We must make them aware that people are not worthless beings motivated only by self-gratification. I mean, this is such an interesting, provocative statement that Mother's saying here. She's specifically talking about the Korean people and how they need to understand the truth of the providence. And Mother said a few times in her speeches lately that we need to know the truth of the providence. It's like we haven't fully understood the extent to which the providence is taking place and what everything really means. And she's the Korean people, to make the change that needs to happen to unify Korea, they need to recognize the providential time, providential place, historical place that they're living in and what it means. And particularly this sentence of make them aware that people are not worthless beings motivated only by self-gratification. I mean, it's such a, almost feels random. Like that's not what Mother usually talks about. But I feel like, I think we experience too the secularization of our culture, which is really coming further and further away from God. And we've lost the ability to recognize that we are God's children as our essence. Even in the United States, there's so much controversy about religion and faith, and you're not so free to express your spirituality anymore because it can be interpreted as being, like one-sided or pushing other people away. But I think, this sentence is really pushing us to shift the culture. She's asking us to help people understand our identity as God's children, that our only motivation is not just to please ourselves, but that we are inherently these children who want to live for the sake of others, who want to have filial piety, and that original heart and mind can be sparked if the right education, if the right seeds can be planted, then that can really be blossomed. But otherwise, all we see is selfishness and all the problems of the world, unless we're giving them new food, right? New fertile soil to be able to blossom into their original selves. We are presently working to establish an environment where we can attend Heavenly Parent on earth. In particular, this people, this nation to which God's only begotten daughter was born for the first time after 6,000 years, must not remain as two countries, but must become one. To this end, it is critical to educate the people not only about God's providence, but about the truth of history as well, so that each can stand in the position to fulfill his or her responsibilities. In this, the role of women is particularly important. And so again, it's this theme that it's our job to help educate people, to help them understand, because I really believe we have some special way, some special gift that can move people's hearts and change their minds in a way that our male counterparts have not been able to do up until this point in time. And it's because we represent this other part of God that has not been fully expressed, and it moves people because there's like this deep longing for it, right? People respond to it because it's an answer to this, unrealized desire people have. And, I want to highlight this point that when Mother's talking about Korea, she identifies it as the nation to which God's only begotten daughter was born. And it's interesting because she's not specifically mentioning true parents in this identification of what Korea is. And again, I'm reminded over and over how Mother is asking us to really understand who she is and how significant her role is in this time of history. It doesn't mean true father is not equally important, but it means that we as disciples of true parents have not fully understood how important Mother's role, even how hard it was for us to accept the only begotten daughter terminology, right? And to make that part of our normal conversations. But I feel like Mother is over and over highlighting this point, that if we can understand who she is and help the Korean people understand who she is, so much can be unwrapped and can be healed through that. A mother's role does not end when she gives birth to a baby after carrying it for 10 months. Mothers continue to protect their babies and keep an eye on them constantly to ensure they grow up well and healthy. Mothers' devotion and effort are necessary until their children are capable of making decisions on their own and of discerning right from wrong. The Korean people in particular must understand this in order to fulfill their responsibilities as God's chosen people. When you look back in history, they have been a pitiable people. Now, first of all, I love all of this, right? I feel often when people, and especially men, and I'm not trying to put men down, but when people talk about a mother's love, it's often, the beginning stages of motherhood. It's the carrying the baby in your womb, birthing the baby, the difficult process and the painful life and death experience of that, and staying up all night nursing your baby. That is usually what's recognized and highlighted as an example of a mother's love. But I love that Mother is talking about how it doesn't end there. And mothers continually are keeping an eye on their children, making sure they're growing up well. And they continue to do that until their children can make decisions on their own. And it's this energy and image of like mothers creating a safety net and a bubble and a space for children to grow up and be nurtured and, really come to stand on their own. And it's true, moms are, dads are the ones who want to throw the kids up in the air and just like push them in the pool. And, they're the crazy people, at least in my life. And the moms are usually the ones who are like, well, let's be safe and, let's talk about your feelings and, that kind of stuff. And that role of mothers, I mean, you think about like mothers' leadership in that too, mothers making this other space to consider the other parts of the providence that haven't always been at the forefront. And she's an example of that on this providential cosmic level that we also see represented in our families. And it's interesting that she's saying in right after this, right, talking about the role of moms, she's saying the Korean people must understand this in order to fulfill their responsibilities. And again, it's just highlighting, I think we still have to discover it, but it's highlighting this role of the only begotten daughter and what it means for people and for history. And I think we're still realizing it and still understanding what it is, but Mother is saying this is important for the Korean people to understand. And then she goes on to talk about the Korean history and how painful it's been. She says foreign powers have invaded them numerous times. Though they also had their times of glory, they ultimately settled on the Korean peninsula because they disliked war. Yet they have had to endure indescribable suffering during the course to complete heaven's great providence, which was carried out through the Korean people. And it's true, I'm doing a lot of studying about Korean history and writing a lot of papers on the Korean War and what can be done for the two Koreas. But the history of Korea is so painful and it's so difficult, invaded so many times, not of people who have sought out to, to take over different areas, but of people who have tried to maintain peace and honor their nation and their identity. And that, this is something that has really prepared Korea to be able to understand God's heart and God's providence in a much more difficult and deep way. Thanks to God's protection, however, the true parents and ancestors of humanity, long awaited by heaven, who can give new life to all humanity as God's children, were born among the Korean people. What would have happened if the providence of the only begotten daughter had begun in earnest at the time of their advent? Now this, please put light bulbs around this, because she's doing this over and over again in her recent speeches. She's saying what would have happened if Mother's identity, if the providence of the only begotten daughter had begun in earnest at the beginning. What if that had begun at the beginning of true parents' identity and blessing in Advent? And it's, there's almost a lamentation, there's almost a sadness in Mother. The speech we read last week about mothers looking back on the history of our church and seeing that things have not been perfect. And she's looking towards, the next couple of years, the next 10 years or so, Mother's going to probably transition to spirit world. And she's reflecting and thinking what still needs to be done. And this point of Mother's identity, has only been brought to the forefront in the last few years. And it's still hard for people to understand. It's still hard for people to really wrap their minds and their hearts and unite fully with this idea of who Mother is. But Mother's thinking, what if I had really been understood when I was first blessed? What if I had been lifted up as the only begotten daughter from the very beginning of the advent of true parents? And she's mentioning this over and over again. So I think this is something really important for us to think and pray on and try to understand, why is she bringing this up over and over again? It is the true parents, the true mother, and the only begotten daughter who can give rebirth to fallen people. Next year, we will dedicate the Channel Sanctum, where we will be able to attend Heavenly Parent. Then indeed, the substantial environment that Heavenly Parent had desired, dreamed of, and waited for over 6,000 years will finally emerge. The issue, however, is that those on the Korean Peninsula, especially absolutely everyone in South Korea, need to be engrafted as the people of the Heavenly Parent. You, the members of the Women's Federation, have a critical role to play in this task. So first of all, here she's identifying true parents giving rebirth, but she's really highlighting the role of the mother figure, true mother, the only begotten daughter who can give rebirth to people. And so it's like if we can't break through in understanding who mother is and her role in the providence, then we will not experience full rebirth. I think especially our members, many of them have really understood Father's heart and really loved him, but still, I think many people are still understanding who mother is and understanding her leadership. And if we can't do that, we can't break through, and we can't bring more people through this pipeline of being reborn through true Father and especially true mother, the mother figure who actually gives rebirth, the Holy Spirit. A lot of times in more recent events, I'm noticing that the translator will use the words the substantial Holy Spirit in the Korean Sunday services they use the word substantial Holy Spirit. And it's interesting to frame it that way, that mother is the substantial Holy Spirit. And in the Christian tradition, it's the Holy Spirit who gives that rebirth, right? Who gives that kind of more motherly energy. So it's good to think about it like that. And again, she's highlighting this point, especially absolutely everyone in South Korea need to be engrafted as people of Heavenly Parent. Okay, there we go. So, I mean, when we were in Korea, several times in the final speech, Mother very strongly spoke about witnessing, and specifically to the different leaders of Korea, how important 100% witnessing in your city and in your town, be responsible for Gapyeong. All of Gapyeong needs to be restored if we want to restore all of Korea. So it's not like Mother's thinking, oh, we need to lightly witness. She's really thinking in her mind that all of South Korea needs to fully understand who Heavenly Parent is. And though that is an incredible goal, it's a challenging goal, but Mother is really pushing us to get there. And the members of Women's Fed, the women leaders, have a critical role to play in that task. What is that? She says, you must educate those around you, your region, tribe, and your nation with a motherly heart and give them new life, rebirth, new life. This is so that through the true parents, they can receive Heavenly Parents' blessing and rise to the position of God's true children. Our path lies in splendor before us. There is nothing to impede us. We are confident. We have nothing to fear. Why do you hesitate? I have said on several occasions that if you walk in unity with me, miracles will happen. Do you believe this? I mean, amazing paragraph here. And Mother's answer for the role of Women's Fed and of women leaders is that we need to educate people with the motherly heart. Again, this heart that is unique to women, this sensitivity we have that is unique. And that's where rebirth can be given to people. And they can become God's children. And, you know, Mother's words here of being completely confident, having no fear. When I read these words, we have nothing to fear. And she's asking us, why do you hesitate? She, you know, it doesn't come across as a judgment, but she's asking us to look, why are we hesitating? If we know who we are, if we know who our true mother is, why are we hesitating? And if we can unite with her, miracles are going to happen. Things that we can't imagine. The more that we can unite and really do what Mother's asking and understand her heart, the miracles will occur. In the last paragraph, through your accomplishments as Women's Federation members, your husbands will also win great medals. That is killing two birds with one stone. Will you do it? I pray you will all become members of the Women's Federation that are qualified to establish heaven's traditions, educate others, and help them be reborn as God's true sons and daughters. I believe in all of you. Let us do our very best. Now, I know this sentence we've talked about a few times in our discussion, but my interpretation of this, where mother's talking about, your accomplishments will also help your husbands be accomplished, and killing two birds with one stone. I feel like, we know, and mother knows, that the history of our church has been for women to play a certain role, and for women oftentimes to support their husbands in the providence, and to kind of, play the family figure and stay at home. But I feel like mother is really encouraging women to not be afraid to step up anymore, to not hold back, to not feel like there's a certain role for them, especially in the Asian Confucian rooted tradition, where there's like a differentiation between the male and female role. I feel like mother is really asking women to step up, to take the lead, and have confidence that everything you do will also bring glory to your husband. It's not, disrespecting your husband. It's not making him less than, but everything you do also lifts up your husband, glorifies your family. And if we can get to that place as a movement, I think that will be very exciting. And again, she's kind of summarizing here that our role is to establish heaven's traditions, educate people, and help them be reborn. I believe in all of you. Let us do our very best. So my few sentence takeaway from all of this is feeling super empowered as a woman, first of all, super encouraged. I remember coming out of that speech feeling excited. I talked to some brothers who were in that speech, and I was like, what did you get? When we were like riding the bus back, and I was like, what did you get from that? And it was interesting because some of them were talking about mother's really serious about Korea. I was like, yes, she is very serious. Okay, what else? Like trying to like pull it out. And some of them get it, right? Some of them absolutely get it, but some of them definitely didn't. And I think that's the situation we're in. Mother, I think it's something that resonates with us. It's like an answer to something that's on our heart, has been on our hearts. And mother's saying, please don't be afraid anymore. We need the women to take the lead. We are the answer for everything that we're experiencing in the providence right now. And I feel like she's also saying, I need you to stand with me. I'm trying to stand up as the only begotten daughter, and I have this role to play, but I need the women to help bring people to me, because it's only women who can really understand the mother's heart. We're the only ones who can bring people to mother. And if we don't stand up, then, many men do understand mother and they have a very deep relationship with mother, but there's a unique role that women can play in being a bridge in this area, and mother needs us and is counting on us.